on the police logs, there's a few different entries where the police, law enforcement, were called out to what they called harassment. And harassment is a lesser charge than stalking. And as far as I remember, unsurprisingly, no report taken. But it's important to know what stalking is legally. Interestingly, this was written on November the 13th, 2022. Weirdly. And stalking is an offence. There is a charge for stalking. You can be convicted of stalking. And one thing I've noticed when I've been I've looked at lots of criminal records, lots of background checks. And you might recall that I went through Darian Armstrong's criminal record. He was a local person who had been brandishing a machete, and they pile on the charges. And lots of people have said to me that the burglary charge that Brian Kohberger is charged with is just for entering the home, not actually for taking anything, although I suspect that something may have been taken. They said that there's evidence that it was a targeted attack, and it has made me wonder if something was taken and if that something could have been Kaylee's phone, because of her LinkedIn being removed, and because apparently they had to access certain things through her family that would have been available on her phone. I can't remember exactly what they were. But they didn't have to do that with the others. So I wondered if her phone had been taken. So maybe that wasn't a case of piling on an extra charge for entering the home. And also there's no evidence of breaking and entering. So, I mean, I suppose they've got to prove that he was actually there. But I thought burglary was breaking and entering, actually, damage it. Well, as far as we know, there wasn't any doors damaged. And I wanted to do a video on this, actually. I'll get it all in now before I start on what I'm about to say. Is that I don't know if you're aware, but I know of at least one example of this is Israel Keys. So with the Lorraine and I can't remember their names. They're a couple on the East Coast, kind of Massachusetts sort of way. No, Vermont, I think it was. He basically broke into their house and he tied them up, he killed them, and he burnt the house down. But he told the police, you got to watch his interviews if you haven't done that before his interrogation, it's fascinating. He told the police that he got into the house either the day before or earlier that day via the garage and opened a window or something. He unlatched something so that he could enter the house later on. And I've heard of other cases where that's been done before. Joseph D'Angelo, I'm not sure, but there's quite a few other cases. I think that's quite a common thing, and I have wondered if this person could have, I mean, you couldn't, it would be more noticeable if the back door was open and the sliding doors. In fact, they probably they might have come home got back in the house that way. It wouldn't have been a good idea to open that door. And I don't know actually how this person would get in the first place. I mean, that begs the question if they knew the person or if that person had any reason to enter the house. But that person, if they did enter, could have undone the bedroom door. Upstairs, that's provided they could enter the bedroom and the lock wasn't. You see, it seems like they'd know the person really to have done that, and I don't know if they did do that, but I don't know. I'm wandering far from where I'm supposed to be going here. But so back to these charges that they usually pile on all these charges like they did with Darian Armstrong. You know, they just want to make sure they get them for something, even if they can't get them for one charge, they get them for another. Like things that are basically covering each other, like trespass and burglary. So if they have evidence of stalking, then why isn't one of his charges stalking? Like, I don't really, I find, I'm thinking about it now when I've just been reading this, I kind of find it hard to believe that they do have evidence of stalking when they haven't charged him with stalking. But you need a bit more proof. It's not just a matter of somebody following somebody online or because, like, going by their house, you know, if he was to be viewing them at their house, that's voyeurism. And I don't think that's the same charge as stalking. You know, peeping Tom, that's voyeurism. Let's see if voyeurism is a... criminal charge. Video voyeurism. Is voyeurism a crime? Why has it started right in the middle? Or maybe it was... Is classified as a sex crime. Is it actually called voyeurism? This type of crime includes taking videos or pictures of someone without the person's knowledge in a restroom, locker room or dressing room. It also voyeurism charges occur when you violate another person's expectation of privacy. Oh yeah, look, drones. Interesting. Do you know who the drone specialist is? MPD. Well, that'll be Brett Payne. But there's also one that they've got like a big focus on drones and is it surveillance technology, something like that, in Washington State, in Pullman specifically. Yeah, so I think I don't think it's enough to be just following someone or going being in the vicinity of where they live or looking at them online. How many blokes probably look at girls online? How many girls look at guys online? It needs to be a bit more than that. And they don't have to be somebody you know, because everybody's got their flipping pictures. So many people have got them on public because we all like to show off about things. So let's go back to where we were. Not there. Here we go. Okay, right. What's the difference between stalking and harassment? Generally speaking, both charges entail a pattern of behaviour defined as 2 or more acts within a 90-day period that cause a person distress. In some cases, these offences can include similar acts. Similar to what? Similar to each other. Such as following a targeted individual. So there's one, but that's not enough. 2 or more acts. So following's not enough. Sending unwanted calls and messages, monitoring and surveillance. Okay, so it does sound like you could follow somebody and monitor them. But when they say monitor and surveillance, I don't think that's just looking at somebody's pictures online, because that's what everybody does. It's more than that. Showing up uninvited at the person's home or work, sending unwanted gifts. However, there are some primary differences between stalking and harassment that offenders must know to gain a better understanding of penalties. Well, it's not just offenders that need to know that. Long-term repercussions and other elements of criminal proceedings. So, stalking versus harassment, 3 key differences. So, this is in South Carolina. 1, the intent. Harassment and stalking are different crimes that differ on a baseline level. Essentially, these differences are rooted in a couple of core elements. The intent behind the crime and what the defendant must prove in court to avoid a conviction. Right, okay. Harassment entails a pattern of behaviour that causes an individual mental distress. South Carolina law describes harassment as a pattern of intentional, substantial and unreasonable intrusion into the private life of a targeted person that would cause a reasonable person in their position to suffer mental distress. Now, you could argue that looking at somebody's pictures on Instagram is not their private life. That's their public life, because that's their public profile. And if they wanted to keep it private, they wouldn't put it on Instagram. I'm not throwing shade at anybody for doing that. My pictures are public on my social media. But I'm just saying that there's people that can look at my pictures, and there's no crime in that. Stalking. Contrary to harassment charges, stalking entails a pattern of behaviour that causes an individual to fear for the safety of themselves and or their family. State law defines stalking as a pattern of words or conduct that is intended to cause a targeted person and would cause a reasonable person to fear for their safety. Now, should I click on fear for their safety? Are they going to give us examples of what that might... I can't click on it, it's just underlined. As you might expect, based on the above definitions, it's usually more challenging to prove a felony, stalking, than it is to prove a misdemeanour, harassment, in court. While the latter, the harassment, simply requires proof of emotional or mental distress, the former, stalking, requires proof that a targeted individual experienced fear for themselves or a family member of at least one of the following: death, assault, bodily injury, criminal sexual contact, kidnapping, property damage. The degree, another key difference between stalking and harassment is the degree of crime each one entails. Harassment is considered a misdemeanor, while stalking is considered a felony. This distinction is crucial for various reasons. Not only can it influence which legal defence strategy is most effective for a defendant in court, but it directly determines the severity of penalties that a person faces if convicted. The penalties, as you might expect, based on the degree of each crime, a stalking conviction entails harsher consequences than a harassment conviction. Consider the following differences in penalties for each offence. So harassment in the first degree, up to 3 years in prison, up to £1,000 fine. Harassment in the second degree, up to 30 days in prison, up to $200 fine. Harassment with prior convictions. In some cases, the stakes are heightened by certain conditions. For example, if a person has accrued prior harassment or stalking offences over the last 10 years, or acted in violation of a restraining order, they can face enhanced penalties, including up to 1 year in prison, up to $1,000 fine. Stalking, on the other hand, if the defendant is convicted of stalking, they can be charged with a felony that is punishable by up to 5 years in prison, up to $5,000 fine. So you can see what it is for. You can see there's stalking in violation of a restraining order, up to 10 years, up to $7,000. Stalking with prior offences, up to 15 years, up to $10,000. What is aggravated stalking? Aggravated stalking is a crime of a higher degree than both stalking and harassment. It involves stalking accompanied or followed by an act of violence. Under South Carolina law, it's considered a felony punishable by up to 5 years in prison and a $5,000 fine. In the instance that the defendant is convicted of aggravated stalking in violation of a restraining order, they face up to 10 years in prison and a $7,000 fine. If the defendant commits aggravated stalking within 7 years of a prior offence, they face up to 15 years in prison and a $10,000 fine. So this is a defence lawyer defending stalking. So, I don't know whether Brian Kohberger is guilty or innocent, and I don't know whether he actually was stalking or harassing or he wasn't, but I would suspect that they don't have evidence that he was stalking, because otherwise I think they would do what they do with all crimes and pile on as many charges as they can. They've put in burglary when they, if you're being done for murder, burglary is neither here nor there. So why add a burglary charge? But they do it anyway. I mean, he's going to get shot, probably, if he gets found guilty of murder. So what's a burglary charge going to do? But they still put it on there, and they still would have put a stalking charge on there, I think, if they had had evidence of it. And it makes me wonder, do they really have evidence? Well, then why no charge for stalking?